Hey guys, you're catching another episode of the Spin-Off Show. On this particular episode, I've got Jimmy McPike joining the show. If you don't know who Jimmy is, he's actually been on the Jock and Nerd Podcast a couple times now. Along with that, he has served in the military as a Marine. He has a degree in history, specifically the history of Ireland, and he's also an aspiring writer. On this particular episode, we talk about a shit ton of history, specifically Ireland, England, a little bit about the Romans, and then how that kind of translates and relates to American history. We go into racism and the idea of America. We talk a little bit about the current state of affairs in the United States. We talk UFC, a little Conor McGregor, and we even talk a little bit about his time in the Marines. I think this was a really interesting discussion, and you hit play, so now you're going to check it out. This is the Jock Spin-Off Show. And we're recording. Hello, Jimmy. How's it going?
Doing well.
Nice.
How's it going?
I'm all right, man. I'm all right. I'm a little hungover, to be honest with you.
It happens.
Yeah. I went out last night and I drank too much. I woke up at probably 5 or 6 in the morning on my couch, having eaten a full burrito. For some reason, I decided to order 2 burritos last night. Yep. And by the time I woke up, the other burrito was cold. And I was like, this is fucking a waste. And I just threw it out.
Yep.
Yeah. So that was a bad decision.
I mean,
one burrito is always a good decision. Ordering 2, not a good decision.
It depends on how drunk you are when you order it.
Yeah.
Because like I was out with some friends once, and then I was like one of the I was like last man standing. Because and usually I go down first. So then now it's like my turn where I've got a buddy carry my friend out of the Uber, get him up to his apartment, and then we're like, we're right on Milwaukee, Flash Tacos over there. Fuck it, let's get a burrito.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that was the mindset I had. I wasn't completely wasted or anything. I remember everything, but it was just like when you drink a little bit, you get hungry, and I just overestimated how hungry I would be. Not only that, I overestimated eating a burrito, and then when you eat something, you get immediately tired. And I just laid down for a second, and then I fell asleep.
Yep. Been there.
The life and times of me. But anyways, Jimmy McPike back on the podcast, except not on Jock and Nerd this time.
Same
been
feed.
On. Yeah, same feed, though. But you were on a couple shows, too?
I was on 2 for you guys, and then 1 for A Place to Hang Your Cape.
Oh, nice. Yeah. You still writing?
Not really.
Not really.
And it's like, and I do feel bad about it because they were like, "Hey, do you want to keep doing this?" And like I did, but shit kept coming up. So then it's like I kind of didn't, and now I basically don't, and I never really like told them. So, yes, sorry,
David. Guys.
Yeah, sorry about that, guys.
Your pen name on there is Bard Brehon.
Yeah.
What's the origin of that again?
So
I know you talked about it.
But always worth re-upping. Right. So that comes from the concept of Brehon law, which was it dated from pre-Christian times in Ireland up until the English conquest at the end of the 9 Years' War in 1603. And part of that was that it gave special status to court musicians, poets, storytellers, because they were the keepers of Gaelic culture and history and society. So part of what I want to do in my life is preserve stories, by like being a historian, and then, advancing, in this case, American culture. And so that's, when I had to choose a pen name, I was like, well, I wanted to be something meaningful. So that's what I came up with.
Do you have to have a pen name?
I sort of did. It was because when I was coming up with it, I was 1 in the Marine Corps, and then 2, I was wrestling in college.
Jesus.
Yeah,
you're awesome.
I mean, not so much anymore. But,
yeah, right. Back then.
But yeah, it was, so it was, the Marine Corps doesn't like having, it's like, hey, this guy who's a Marine, did this thing and we don't like it, so we're going to get uppity about it. And then the NCAA are assholes about,
any sort of
athletes and their image. And,
gotcha. That's
even though I was like a backbencher on a D2 wrestling team, very, very good D2 wrestling team, but still, or it's like no one's coming up for my autograph.
Right.
And, I'm not going to make any money with it. They're still dicks about it because it's amateurism.
Right. They want to preserve the
fucking
false
lie.
Yeah. The lie, as the NCAA tournament is going on right now, and they're profiting billions, while the athletes, if they get caught getting paid anything, are dragged through the mud.
Shout out to, I think Georgetown, though. I think that's who my family roots for. I'm not.
Georgetown?
Yeah, because
it's in the tournament.
well, because I follow. They weren't okay.
Yeah, they didn't even make it.
Okay. Because I follow my uncle on Twitter, and that's like my only college basketball thing.
You're not a college basketball guy, right? Well, if you're a wrestler, I've noticed that when you're a wrestler, you don't really give a fuck about basketball.
Yep, because it's
same time period, and it's just such a completely different sport.
Yeah, I think they're wimps.
Yeah, right. That's funny thing. I did both in high school. I did basketball for 2 years, and I did wrestling. So I like both, but I've been around enough wrestlers where they think basketball players are sissies.
I mean,
I can see it. But I wanted to have you on because you're a number of things. So it's just going to be fun to talk to you for a bit. You're a high school or a college wrestler, collegiate athlete, right?
Was.
Was a Marine, still currently a Marine?
There are no ex-Marines, but I'm not like assigned to a unit or anything anymore. Where it's my contract's up, so I'm not I am a Marine who is no longer in the Marine Corps. Is the parlance?
Gotcha. Okay, you were a writer, and you're trying to write again.
I am a writer.
Okay.
I don't do I don't really write for a place to hang your cape anymore. Which again, sorry about that.
Not to make that super awkward.
Yeah, but so I don't really that as something I have done.
And then not the thing that most intrigues me besides all the other things is you studied history, and you would consider yourself kind of a historian.
I have a bachelor's degree in history.
Yep.
So that, and because when I graduated, I was like, okay, wait, do I get to call myself a historian now?
Yeah.
So
how does that work?
The way I think of it is there's like levels. So, like PhDs who they've published original theses and, they write for like big time journals and all that. They're like historians where no one can really, their credentials are on a certain level unassailable. And it's, goes down from there to where you've got all the way at the bottom are like history buffs who,
read Wikipedia and consider themselves
where they read a lot of popular history. So that's the problem with that is a lot of popular histories are written by journalists. So it's like Bill O'Reilly keeps writing history books, and it's not it. It's not him and like his ilk doing it specifically bothers me the most because it's very much meant to politicize history, and it's meant to advance a certain worldview when that's not what history is about, and it poisons the dialogue. And there are people on the left who do that, and there's, it's people who shouldn't but do. And then there's a bit of a gray area for people like Dan Carlin, who they aren't historians, but they do like podcasts. Right. And so like him, the guy who did History of Rome and is doing Revolutions now, they're also like that, where they're they tend to be either poli-sci or journalism people, and they communicate well, so that's why people listen to them versus like reading academic history. I mean, it's not for everyone,
right?
Because it's really, really dry.
Well, Dan Carlin, hardcore history, right? He tells it, he orates it in a way that it's like a storytelling.
Yeah, he's probably the best like lay historian, because he cites all his sources. He lays out like, hey, this is where I got everything, and like this is my translation from so and so, and this is what I'm reading from, and this is who I was reading. And then another thing is he gives that disclaimer where he says, I am not a historian. This is just my recollection of events, and like I'm throwing this in here because I think it's cool and like it's an interesting story versus maybe it's not the most accurate. And he
listen to his stuff.
Yeah. I do really like his podcast because it is very well done, but it's not something I go to when I have a burning question.
Okay.
That's so I'm like one level above that, where I understand the processes and the mechanics, but you shouldn't take anything I tell you at face value.
Okay.
Where it's something where you need to, I'm not like much of an authority, and my credentials aren't unassailable, and I'm going to be more prone to making mistakes. And like even, like I did most of my coursework on Irish history.
Yeah, I remember.
So, like I'm good in that very, very narrow area where I did a lot of independent research for writing term papers and stuff. But I couldn't tell you, like there are a lot of gaps in my knowledge beyond that.
Why'd you choose Irish history?
My family's Irish.
Okay.
So
it makes a lot of fucking sense.
And yeah, I didn't want to do something like American history because
played out.
It's one of those things where it's like by the time I got to the point where I could choose what I wanted to study, it was like, I've read this book before. I want to, see about like, hey, where'd my ancestors come from?
You had mentioned when we, before we started the recording, that you wanted to kind of get into history and what was that?
The mechanics of
it. Yeah.
Yeah. Cause that is one thing that people have a lot of misconceptions about.
Yeah. Tell me about that.
So you read like a popular history, and it's like, here's a list of stuff that happened. You're
talking about like textbooks you read as you're growing up?
Not even textbooks, like, a book that a journalist wrote about like the war with the Tripoli pirates. Okay. It tends to be like, and this stuff happened, and maybe they'll make like some notes or something. But then you read an academic history, and then it's like there's footnotes, endnotes. There's going to be one or the other, but like, again, where people are like, hey, this is, proper MLA format. This is my citation. This is all of that. This is what other researchers in the field seem to think. This is why I agree or disagree with them. This is, looking at this topic from the ins and out of every angle. And here is my opinion on it. Here is my expert view on the matter. Here's why I think that.
Mm-hmm.
Versus it's otherwise a lot of journalism ones, they tend to be more declarative, where it's like, and this happened, and they don't explore alternate points of view.
They give it from one perspective only, and they don't
Mm-hmm.
they don't share with you that it's not from their perspective. They kind of say it as if it's this is the only way that it happened.
Sometimes
Okay.
it varies. There's varying levels of quality,
Mm-hmm.
and they're depending on what someone's motivations are. Because I've studied the processes of journalism a little bit.
Mm-hmm. So
you want to be very declarative in it. You're just like, these are, this is the story. This is what we're telling you.
you don't want to, as a journalist, you don't want to be flip-flopping.
Yeah, there's not
a lot of room for that.
So but then you lose a lot of the nuance, because history, the study of history is inherently revisionist.
Right.
So that's you're taking a look back over things as new information becomes available. So that's something like, back in like the 1800s, people, they read Plutarch and, all of those primary sources. And then they're like, okay, and this is what happened. Now memorize this. That's history. Done deal. Then as you start to look at new information that becomes available, so archaeologists dig up, a new cache of records or something like that, where as people gain more access to the information, they start to look at the nuance of it and the more subtle ideas.
Mm-hmm.
So,
do you have an example of that?
So back, in the before times of history, people would attribute the fall of the Roman Empire to things like moral decay or to lax virtues in society.
Oh yeah, I remember hearing all that stuff.
Yeah, where it's like, they abandoned what made them Romans, and as a result, their society collapsed and stuff like that. Versus you look at now, a lot of the prevailing theory is there was long-term population decline in the provinces.
Why was that?
Disease, I think, is the most common one, but it's, I don't remember off the top of my head what the smoking gun was, but I know
how big was the Roman Empire at its peak?
So the Mediterranean Sea,
mm-hmm.
all of the land around that, all of the Italy, Greece, all of that, most of modern day Turkey, most of England and Wales.
Really? Wow.
Yep. And then most of North Africa. So, so everything above the Sahara Desert was Roman territory for a time.
This was bigger than the Greek Empire.
There was never really
a Greek Empire.
Sort of, but that's because there was the Roman Empire,
right?
Which most people will tell you it fell in the late 5th century.
Okay.
And that was the Latin Empire, where it's the people who spoke Latin. But then after that, there was the Byzantine Empire, which was still the Roman Empire, and they called themselves Roman, and everyone called them Roman right up until they themselves were conquered. But they were Greek speaking. So after a couple centuries, when everyone was Greek and speaking Greek, it became a lot more Greek, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But they still called themselves Roman. So there was kind of a Greek Empire.
So the Greek Empire was after?
It was the Greek-speaking Roman Empire. But it's nuance. It's
right.
Shades of gray.
Right. So
the new information that came out about the Romans, it wasn't necessarily moral decay. And
no, there was, for a number of reasons, the provinces and the rural areas became depopulated. So then as a result, there wasn't the kind of infrastructure and demographic support they needed to do things like integrate new factions of tribal peoples into the empire the way they had in the past. So you had situations where, the Goths or the Franks or whoever could move into the area, and then, back in like Augustus's time, they would be, they would learn Latin, and they would say, okay, now you join the Roman army, and, you have to do things this way and that way. And then at the end, we'll give you a plot of land and you'll be a Roman citizen, and, you can vote in elections and all that, and, we'll make a proper Roman out of you. But then as time went on, that didn't happen. And so you had whole units of the Roman army became, they would have called them barbarians, but these tribal peoples.
Mm-hmm.
And so they could act more or less independently, and they could say, okay, well, you said we fight for you, you give us this land, we fought for you, this is our land now. And there was still like a nominal allegiance to the empire, but it effectively became Gothic or whoever's territory, and they were still under their tribal structure with their king and all of that. And then when they decided they didn't want to, when they decided they wanted to do something, they did it.
Mm-hmm. They weren't following the rules anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So it was more or less the bricks just started falling. It wasn't one big thing. It was just little pieces were chipping off.
Mm-hmm.
Huh. That's crazy. I'm just thinking about back then, and how they didn't have obviously the technology we have.
Mm-hmm.
It's just crazy to me to think that the Romans could rule such a large area without technology we have. How does that even work? You have to have a ton of loyalty and a ton of some really good communication.
Mm-hmm. And the ability to project power.
Yeah.
So that's one reason that Roman roads were so vital, because you could deploy troops more effectively. So say, something happens up in the north of Gaul. What would happen was they would light a series of signal fires, get word back to Rome, and then they could deploy troops as needed.
Mm-hmm.
So it wouldn't really happen like this, but just for an example, if they had a couple legions in Italy, they could take it from Italy along the roads up into Gaul to put troops there. Realistically, they would have already had armies at the border areas where they suspected trouble, because, that's where you needed them.
Mm-hmm.
But to illustrate my point, they could move them across the empire, or like if they needed a much bigger army to fight the Parthians or whoever, they could move them much more quickly than most other armies at the time and get them where they needed to go.
In the Roman Empire, was everyone speaking the same language? Were they converting people? So there's different dialects going on all over the place?
Yeah, so
how do you communicate then?
Because Latin was the lingua franca.
Okay.
So you had people who spoke like Gallic or Brittonic or Greek or something like that. But because Latin was the administrative language, people more or less kind of understood it.
Mm-hmm.
Even if they weren't, 100% fluent, most people would be able to at least understand it. So that's like today where like English, you go anywhere in the world mostly, and you start speaking English, people are going to have some idea at least, or they're going to at least be like, oh, English.
Right. they're going to know they could recognize the language at least. How did that happen? Do you have any? How did English become the language of the world?
The British Empire was, for about a century, was the dominant political and financial force on the planet.
And didn't they have a really good navy too?
Yep.
So they could
get
out to the world.
Yeah, I mean, that was, again, power projection.
Yeah.
Was their ability to admit, that's how they controlled their empire. But, they ruled India, a lot of Africa, Canada, places like that. And,
here.
I mean, not Illinois ever, I don't think.
Not Illinois. We were French.
Because I think they got it, or part of it, after the French and Indian War.
Mm-hmm.
But then they didn't settle it too much, and then the next decade, America was not anymore, motherfucker.
Yeah. Not anymore, motherfucker. What's England and so has England always back when they had their empire, were they ruling Ireland as well?
Mm-hmm.
And then the Irish were not
not
tell me about that.
So what happened there was, back after the Norman conquest of England, there were a lot of ambitious, militaristic lords and knights and all that who, were very into the idea of having military adventures in places like Scotland or Wales or Ireland or Sicily or wherever.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't particularly picky. So there was the King of Leinster. And
what time period is this?
This is the 12th century.
1100s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there, at the time, Ireland was a collection of petty kingdoms, and that was having to do with you had tribal allegiances all the way up to, there was a nominal high king, but it was more of a social position than it was a political one. So at that time, there was the Rory O'Neill. It was Rory O'Neill, I believe, was trying to consolidate power as the High King and establish himself as the overlord of Ireland, as one does. And as part of that, he had to invade Leinster. And there was some to-do about the King of Leinster absconding with the wife of the O'Rourke chieftain, who was, to borrow a joke from one of my professors, my illustrious ancestor. Because it's my grandmother's maiden name is O'Rourke.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so it was, but yeah, it's probably no, probably not, because people would take their lord's name instead. So it's probably not my direct ancestor, but it's a fun thing.
Fun thing to think about, right?
So anyways, the King of Leinster lost the war, and he was given the boot. So he went to England.
So when you lose the war as a king, you got to hightail it, right, before they
basically
kill you.
I mean, or there's, you can submit to, and then it's a whole complicated clusterfuck, which is part of the reason why Ireland never unified politically during this age the way England and Scotland did.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was very, very difficult to actually establish a ruling dynasty. So, but yeah, that's, we only have so many hours in the day to talk about this. So
we got time, unless you got to go somewhere.
No, but that's something you could that's like a dissertation kind of
okay.
Getting into that. But quick version, the way Ireland and Irish political life worked was it operated on the concept of face. So you could be the High King of Ireland, but that didn't necessarily mean everybody had to obey you unless you established a certain amount of prestige.
Mm-hmm.
So you had Brian Boru, when he was trying to unify Ireland, people, they would eventually submit and pay him homage, and then the next season they would find an excuse to, say, fuck it, we're going to have another war. And they would do that, and they could do that. And so it was very decentralized politically, all the way down to, the local level. So you could have a king, and if that king wasn't, people followed their kings more because of who that king was versus any investiture in the office of king.
Mm-hmm.
So you had, all kinds of little kingdoms all the way up and down, and there were different ranks in society.
And this is all in Ireland, the island, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because then there's Ireland, and then Northern Ireland is part of...
that comes later. But at the time it was, there was some differences down to Ulster had a certain amount of unity to it, Connacht, Munster and all that. And there were regional cultures.
Mm-hmm.
So in Ulster you had Cú Chulainn and stories about him and his compatriots, versus you had different ones in the South. And it was there was a lot of individual spirit that persists up to this day.
Mm-hmm.
It's very there's at least three different correct ways to pronounce Irish.
Really?
The Irish language, yeah. But it's because there's all kinds of regional variants where
is the Irish language Gaelic?
It's Irish Gaelic.
Irish.
Because excuse me. But yeah, because there's Gaelic culture that spread from Ireland to places like the Isle of Man and Scotland in about this same time period too.
Do you follow MMA at all?
Mm-hmm.
So Conor McGregor's put Ireland back on the map.
Recent shenanigans aside,
sure.
He.
Well, I just remember in the build up to, because I'm a huge MMA guy as well. In the build up to his fight with Khabib Nurmagomedov, Khabib would jab him by going, "How come you don't speak your language? You speak English. How come you're not speaking your language? You lost your language."
Yep, because that's a bit of a touchy subject.
Yeah, what's the deal with that? What was he? I mean, I kind of have a feel, but what's the deal with all that?
You have to fast forward about 700 years to the
1800s.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and then at this point, so to wrap up that other point about the King of Leinster, he went to the an English lord, and said, "Hey, back me up here, and then you can be King of Leinster after I die." And the guy Strongbow, he says, "Cool." They win because they have longbowmen and heavy cavalry, and lots of good stuff that Ireland hadn't gotten around to yet. And he, rather than declaring himself King of Leinster, declares himself Lord of Leinster, because the English king was still like, "Hey, you're not trying to establish yourself as an independent king, are you? Because, you're still my vassal." And he said, "No, I'm adding to your domain, sire. I'm not doing what your family did." It's a whole cluster. That's okay. I think this is a tangent worth it. So at this point, you had the Lord of Leinster, who was occupying what was traditionally a kingship, while he was also vassal to the King of England, who was in his capacity as Duke of Normandy, also a vassal of the King of France. Yeah.
What's going on here?
Feudalism.
Feudalism. Okay.
Shit got all fucked up, and they had a lot of wars, and and that's called European history.
Sure.
So, anyways, they so the English holdings, they expand, they contract, they go back, they go forth until finally, just at the end of the reign of Queen Elizabeth, they get everything stamped down finally, and they say, okay, we politically control all of Ireland. The Irish lords, they, sign a peace where they're like, okay, and we'll still be lords, but we're like English lords, and we'll give up Brehon law, and we'll give up this, that, and the other thing. And then they try to do that. It doesn't work out. There's the flight of the earls. They say, all right, fuck this. We're going to France. We're going to affect change at a higher level. Doesn't really work out, but they keep trying. That becomes a running theme in Irish history where they'll, try and rebel. It won't work out. They'll go to France. They'll join the French army to try and fight the English. And it doesn't really ever happen because the French army is more interested in, fighting for France.
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't, in their defense, they weren't exactly spoiling for choices. So they, okay. So after a while, keeping in mind that at this time, most people are farmers and they're just like, hey, I'm trying to farm my land.
I'm just trying to live out here.
But there were a series of what were called Ulster plantation, or there was the plantation system, the most famous of which being the Ulster plantations. That's going to come up again. And where the idea was like, okay, we can't rule the Irish, so let's get rid of them. So this
is from the English?
This was actually started with the Tudors as they were expanding their holdings in Ireland. Most famously, though, and most politically significantly, this was under King James VI of Scotland and First of England. That's that feudalism bit again.
Sure, okay.
Where he said, okay, what we'll do here is we'll kick a bunch of them out of Ulster, and then we'll bring in some Presbyterian Scots in, and then they'll hold the land for us. Because, fuck those guys. And, fuck the Pope. And there was a lot going on that week. So they didn't want to have to deal with it anymore. So that dispossesses the Irish of a lot of their land, and it leads to a system of tenement farming where the native Irish would work the land for British landlords, and sometimes Irish, but mostly British. And they would pay their rent in wheat and, half the shit they grew. So they wound up having to cultivate half their land to pay their rent, and they paid that in wheat. And then the other half, which, in some cases was like half an acre.
Mm-hmm.
So not a whole lot of land. So they're like, okay, we need something that will, be able to sustain us while, we've only got this shit amount of land to deal with. So what are we going to do? So they grew potatoes, which was, had been introduced from the Americas. Mostly people didn't like to rely on them because they were prone to disease. Okay. And it was considered lower than eating like bread.
Potatoes.
Mm.
Wow.
Well, yeah. I mean, during the First World War, a bunch of Germans died because they didn't want to eat turnips because it was considered food for animals, and they were like, I'm not going to. I'd rather starve to death than lower myself to eating animal feed.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, but I mean, I
remember reading about. Side note: I remember reading about the lobster, and at one time it was considered the cockroach of the sea. And they fed it to prisoners, and then someone realized this shit is delicious. What the fuck are we doing here? Giving this to prisoners. Mm-hmm. So, food, the history of food too is another tangent we could get on.
Yep. I mean, history, it's literally everything that's ever happened.
Yes, exactly, yeah. And then you can just specialize, or you can just... But then even when you specialize, you still have to take a wide scope of everything else.
Yeah, so my favorite professor from back in school, he was a British historian, and he did most of his coursework on the social and political climate that led to the abolition of slavery, with focus on one specific abolitionist. And that's what he wrote his thesis on.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, because you can really narrow it down.
Yeah.
So
potatoes, right?
That's right. So they were eating potatoes.
Yes.
Which that was working out okay. It was, people used to talk about Ireland the way we talk about like Somalia now.
Really?
Where it's like this, where they wouldn't have called it this, but basically, a third world hellscape.
Right.
So they, and there's a lot of dirt poor peasant farmers who, were getting by eating potatoes, and it's not a great life, but damn it, it's our life. And so you remember how I said that potatoes were prone to disease?
Sure.
So in 1845 begins what's called the Great Famine, or most people would notice as the Irish Potato Famine.
Okay.
And what happens there is the Irish peasantry, who depended on potatoes, couldn't get them because disease, killing them all. Can't eat
shitty potatoes.
Yeah, you can't eat this collection of like quasi fungus and bacteria and shit. You'll die.
Right.
And they tried, and they died because it's moldy. You can't eat that shit.
Right. It's disgusting.
So it is. It's disgusting, and there's no nutritional value. So they're
eating shitty potatoes,
or not eating.
Or not eating.
Yeah, it does get into some pretty grim shit where like they'll find children dead on the side of the road with their mouths all green because they were eating grass because they were so hungry.
Oh man.
Yeah, shit gets dark.
This is in the 1840s?
Mm-hmm. 1845 through 1848 was that.
Famine.
Well, it was famine all those years, and then it kind of petered out. 1847 was the bad one. So what happens there is, at this time, Ireland had a population of about 8 million people. I've seen some where they say it's like, as much as 12 million, but about 8 million.
We're still talking about the island.
The island itself, yep. Because at this time it is one political entity. It's a kingdom, part of the United Kingdom, where it's all under the Westminster government, but they send representatives to that Westminster government, and there's a whole kerfuffle about, should Catholics be allowed to vote? Because fuck the Pope, and they're dirty papists, and they'll try and overthrow the Queen so that they can install the Pope as Lord of Britain, and a lot of racism
towards the Irish.
So yes,
yeah,
yep, just so much racism.
Because the United Kingdom's, what religion are Lutheran? Protestant?
It's Protestant broadly.
Yeah.
More specifically, Scotland is Presbyterian, which is just Calvinism in Scotland.
Yeah.
And then England is Anglican, and then sometimes you get like Puritan and all kinds of weird sects branching off.
So the Catholics are looked down upon over there.
Yep.
Gotcha. Okay.
Which, I mean, I don't know how bad it is now, but like as late as like 19, like not that long ago, like you and I were both alive when shit like this was going on, where like the Guinness family would disinherit anyone who married a Catholic.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
It was still deep.
Yeah, no, the racism runs deep.
How old are you?
25.
Oh, yeah. So you were 31. But yeah, we were probably alive. We were alive then. Okay. So Catholics are looked down upon over there.
Right. So anyways, so there's millions of people starving. And the British government, they like try some stuff, but the ultimate response they go with was, if these dirty peasants weren't, so slovenly, and if they could have controlled their urges better, and so they weren't so overpopulated, and, why are they even growing potatoes? They knew this would happen. So this is a teachable moment for the Irish people.
Oh, fuck.
Yeah, no, it's because, fun fact, Ireland exported food throughout the entire famine.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's no, agricultural exports increased with the exception of, wheat, beef, dairy, farm shit.
Okay. So they're exporting food, yet the people
the one exception was pork, because they fed pigs with potato peels. Wow. Yeah, so
pigs are getting fucked up.
Yep. So what happened? The end result is Ireland goes from a population of 8 million to a population of 4 million.
Oh, fuck.
Yep. So 1 million people die
every year.
Not every year. This is like throughout the whole crisis. Is round numbers, 1 million people die, and then millions more leave. So that's how you get Irish in places like America.
Right.
Because they were like, okay, we can stay here and starve, or we can, sell everything to try and get away and make a better life for ourselves.
A lot of them immigrated here.
Yep. Which and because this is a very touchy subject for Irish national history, because this doesn't just devastate the population, it devastates Gaelic culture. So that's where you start seeing the Irish language recede on a mass scale. You start seeing people who the people who knew like the old stories and the people who they knew all the old ways of doing things, they start dying out. Mm-hmm. So you see a resurgence in Irish culture and language, and everything starts to die off to the point that they recognize, like 20 years later, like, hey, we need to actively work to preserve this, or it is going to go away forever. So that's why it's, a touchy subject when it's like, why don't you speak Irish? And it's like, well, there were several genocides, and, it's a sticking point. Mm-hmm. We, dealt with it as best we could, but some things were lost along the way.
So when people were dying and all the genocides, then English started to just take over as far as the language?
Because
they're coming here, so they have to learn English.
That's part of it, but it's also, the language of commerce starts to change, and you start seeing areas clear out, and all of these, what used to be, 1-2 acre plots of land, they all get consolidated into great big agricultural centers. So there's not as many people in the countryside keeping the old ways alive. And, you go to the cities, like you go to Dublin and all that, and Belfast, then that's where English is used a lot more, because people, that's like the language of commerce. Sure. That's you're doing business, you got to speak English. So then, you don't speak it as much. Your children don't grow up speaking it.
It dies slowly.
Mm-hmm. Where the end result being that use of Irish in everyday speech, it becomes restricted to what's called the Gaeltacht. And that's been receding, ever since they started measuring it.
Mm.
So,
is it in Ireland? Are there still people communicating in Irish Gaelic? Or is it mostly English?
Mostly it's English, but there are still areas in the West, especially where Irish is still the primary language.
Mm-hmm.
But it's, that changes because there's not really a practical reason to speak it in most of Ireland because everyone speaks English.
Right.
So,
yeah, it's funny you mentioned it's interesting that you mentioned how Irish culture was the genocides and all this stuff was going away. Yet, at least here in America, it seems to have such a strong influence on American culture. Things, something like even like St. Patty's. That's a huge. I know it's not. It's been bastardized, but it's and what I'm saying is Irish. There's an Irish pub everywhere in every city. There's an Irish influence. Everyone knows about stupid things like leprechauns and all that shit. Like there's definitely a big Irish influence in America, even though it was going away in Ireland.
And that's part of a diaspora is people, they spread out, they spread their culture, it gets mixed in, things change. But I mean, like on the whole, that I think is a good thing where, more cultures interacting is better. But when it happens because your people are dying out in large numbers, then it's something where
it's a little bit of a darker turn.
Yeah. It's
wait a minute, we're celebrating this because they had to leave. That's why this is pervasive in our culture now. It wasn't because they voluntarily, or it wasn't because they expanded because they were a healthy society. They left. We're refugees. Yeah. Holy fuck.
Yeah. So, and I personally take issue with St. Patrick's Day and the way it's celebrated because the big issue is there's, such a drinking culture around it. And it's like, it's St. Patrick's Day. Let's go drink like the Irish. And that's
wake up early and get wasted by 3:00.
Yeah. Where that
wear some green
isn't, that's very, very rooted in a lot of really, in a lot of stereotypes that were used to justify the treatment of the Irish during the famine. So I personally am I'm not going to be a huge stick in the mud about this, but I'm just not really that into it.
Yeah. How did that become a thing then? So how did St. Patty's, so it's St. Patrick's or St. Patty?
St. Patrick.
Okay.
Or Paddy.
Paddy. So it's not Patty. Okay.
Because that's from the Irish word for Patrick is Padraig. So then you shorten that to Paddy. So it's,
Okay.
One was the patron saint of Ireland. The other is ground beef. So that's another sticking point.
Okay. So then how does this become a thing?
The culture.
This whole St. Patty's, get drunk, drink with the Irish. How is this thing? How is this a thing?
People are always looking for an excuse to party.
Right.
It's not.
But is the Irish culture drinking? What is the...
it's a drinking culture the way England is a drinking culture. Right. And I use them as, because they were the supposed more civilized people. But there's a pub culture where people, you meet at your local after the days, you have a few pints, you laugh, you sing some songs, it's all in good fun. And that's becomes part of the culture. And, so that's, everyone does it, but then this was also during a time when people were like, how can we fix society? How can we find solutions for all these social ills? So one of them was like drinking became a thing, and they're like, oh, these, poor people, if they would stop drinking their paycheck, then they could crawl out of this systemic system of poverty and oppression that we've put them in, and where, a lot of the same shit you hear today, they were saying back then. And so then there was, the Irish problem for a long time, or the Irish question, or, racist shit like that, where that became the stereotype of like, oh, the morally degenerate papist Catholic Irish who, they just lays about all day drinking, and, if they just worked harder and, if they were just more British, they wouldn't
make it. They wouldn't be where they're at.
But that's not how long-term systematic economic oppression really works. So it's mostly just an excuse to
feel better about yourself.
Yeah. And it's like, else. Oh yeah, I have this nice comfortable middle-class existence. I sure hope that doesn't come at anyone else's expense.
It's funny you mentioned the racism over there, because over here you never hear about this kind of stuff. You always think about racism towards other, whites towards other races. You never hear about white on white crime over there. It's not something I've ever.
That was about, really. A thing in the United States at the turn of, or right after this period where they get a huge influx of immigrants. What was called the Great Migration. You do see like the Know Nothing Party, and even like the KKK. They'll go after Catholics, especially, were on their shit list because they used to be English, and that racism runs deep. And so there was a built-in anti-Catholic sentiment, or anti-immigrant, where they're like, these dirty peasants are going to ruin our perfect white waspy culture, and we just can't have that. So we better put on our robes and go do a whole bunch of racist shit.
Sure, it's crazy that Catholicism is looked down upon over there, and yet now it's in America. It seems like it's
the largest single denomination.
Yeah.
But
I went to a Catholic grade school, and I never thought being a Catholic would make someone look down upon you.
Yep.
That's crazy.
That racism runs deep.
But only the English were racist towards Catholics?
No, that was a thing because, they're like how we've got like race riots today.
Yeah.
They had like religious wars and the 30 Years' War. And so it was, where it became something where there was a lot of political power wrapped up in religion. So if you go against the state religion, you're going against the king.
Because there was no separation between church and state, right?
Which is why things like separation of church and state are a great fucking idea, and why they put it in the fucking Constitution.
I agree. I do not want. I don't want any religion running my government.
No,
that's just too much of a conflict of interest.
No, governments are there so that you always have someone backing you up for all the fun stuff you want to do, like have free speech and drink and sleep around and all the other fun stuff. And then church is there. So the day after, you've got someone to be like, okay, like maybe I didn't make the best choices, but I'm not a bad guy.
Right. I'm not a bad guy. I just like to have a little fun.
Yeah.
And I'll try to do better next time.
It's like, bless me, Father, for I have sinned. I'll admit it. I got fucked up last night. And that's what church is for.
Yeah.
So that's why.
You still see that, though. And I don't have a worldview of every country, but you still see a lot of religion running government in like the Middle East, and a lot of Islamic countries have still religion running government. So
because that's again a way to legitimize your political power. It's like, hey, why does this one guy make all the decisions? Maybe like we could all they've got let's try democracy. But then if you come back like, well, you see, God said this is how it's supposed to be, so shut up.
Right. Once you have that kind of backing.
Yeah, and then once you're in the Middle East, I mean, in like a lot of absolute monarchies there, then there's also like, it's like, shut up and take your oil money check and we'll not worry, we'll hear no more of it.
Mm-hmm.
Which there are some funny stories about during the Arab Spring. You had, places like Egypt and Libya, there were big uprisings, and then so you had people in places like Qatar were like looking around like, hey, do we want to get in on that? And while they were doing it, they're like, the king or emir comes out and he was like, okay. I know there's been some talk of like popular sovereignty. So I built you a nice parliament building. You can go there anytime you want. But wouldn't you rather all like get on great big yachts with all of this oil money? Which, by the way, you're all getting a raise. So do we really need to? You can if you want, but do you really want to?
Right. Look how great you have it over here.
No, some of those places where it's like your life literally could not get better. What more do you want?
Right.
And then you do get less hilarious cases where in places like Afghanistan, that's a way to get people behind you because they're, like people, they like their religion. Mm-hmm. That's their culture. In most cases, it's fine. In some cases, it's horrible. But that's a way, like even in America, you see that where they tie political causes to religiosity.
Sure.
Where it's a way to communicate with people and it's a way to get people behind you. Where you say like, hey, why are we fighting the Soviets? They've got tanks and jet planes and shit. And we're on like, we're just some dudes in a cave. Why are we doing this? It's like, well, they're fucking with our religion. Like, do you want to deal with that? Like, no, fuck that.
Right. It's a rallying.
Where especially in places where you don't have a lot of nationalism,
mm-hmm.
then it's people, because again, most people don't really give a fuck about nationalism if left to their own devices.
Right.
They're kind of like, I'm just trying to get through the day, make it to closing time so I can go to my local, have a few pints. Don't really need to worry about like what is Britain?
Right.
Like I'm just
a dude hanging out.
Yeah.
Living.
Like, hey, God wants this. They're trying to change your religion. It's like, well, shit. Who are they to tell me
right.
what fucking God I should pray to?
Mm-hmm.
I like this one.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. And, we can fight about it all right, we're fighting about this.
Right. It's a much easier way to rally people to defend.
Versus, now in like America, you could just say like, hey, they're fucking America. And you're like, fuck them.
Right. They hate America. Okay. Well, then now we have to get after them. Right. Yeah.
So
that's an easy way to,
mm-hmm.
That's dangerous though. It's dangerous to
get the mob riled up.
Right.
Yeah. Yep.
As someone that's studied history like you have, do you look at how things are today and just kind of look back at history and go, this is kind of where I could see this going? Or are we not learning anything? Or
people don't learn anything because...
Never.
Well, because again, like most people, they're just trying to make it till closing time so, they can go to their local and have a few pints with their mates.
Right.
That like...
No one's invested in history right now. Most
people in general just don't really like, they allocate so many of their daily fuck allowance that when you start getting into like
daily fuck allowance, I like that.
Yeah. Thank you. Where, you get to the point where it's like, okay, we need to worry about these grand sweeping historical changes. They just don't have any more fucks to give.
Right.
They're like, I'm sorry, I really hate my job. Like, I used up all my fucks mining coal today. Like, right. Maybe, like, let's talk about it on Sunday. But, like, for right now, just leave me the fuck alone and, let me just chill out.
Right.
But, yeah, so that's why people don't learn from history. my perspective, having studied history, things are real bad right now.
Yeah.
It is not time to panic yet.
Okay.
This is going to be I think, defining moment going forward as to how we respond to this lunacy and this just this insanity that has been pushed out to the forefront.
When did this start building, in your opinion?
Always. This is something that's been woven into the fabric of American life. Is this, not just the racism, because that was something that's been building up literally since they finished the draft of the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, and also arguably before that, because there were slaves before that, but then they didn't start coming out with like, oh, it'll civilize them. It was more like, well, they were selling, we were buying. It's we're not thrilled with the idea, but we also have bills to pay, and we have this very comfortable lifestyle we want to keep. So maybe let's we'll worry about it later.
Let's not talk about it.
That's future America's problem.
Right.
So that's what I mean. But yeah, there was, obviously slavery, and that was bad. And there was racism, because the racism runs deep. And so that isn't to say there was no racism before then, but then that's when you start getting it built into American society, where it's like, racial superiority at the institutional level. So you have that. You've got, religious traditions weren't as much of a force at this time, but you do see revivals and you do see evangelicalism spread not long after. So you see stuff like that. But, you also see, this demagoguery that, that our current president, whose name I can't bring myself to speak.
So you don't like him?
No, I don't.
Okay.
No, there are many unkind things that I have to say about him. So
feel free to speak your mind.
He's a bully, a fearmonger, a hate monger. He is someone who is overcompensating for very, very deep personal flaws. He's someone who doesn't care about anyone other than himself. Where I, as a mental exercise, when I was particularly mad about a certain thing that had been done, that we won't get into all that, but I started thinking, what's the worst possible thing that could be done to this person? And so, being a historian, I know all the cool executions from around history, there's the ordeal of the boats, there's, crucifixion, all that stuff.
My favorite's the one where they put the rat on you and they light up the bucket so that the rat has to crawl its way out through your stomach.
Good times.
Yeah, those are fun.
Yep. Right. But it occurred to me that the worst possible thing you could do to this man wouldn't be, any of these horrific punishments. There would be a Roman punishment called damnatio memoria.
Okay. What's this?
So that's where they strike your name from their history.
Oh.
So that's, everything with your name on it, they knock it all down. They erase you. So
you never existed?
As best they could. I mean,
right. That would probably be the worst thing you could do to him.
Yeah. Where it's just
this is all ego.
Yep.
A lot of this is ego for him.
Yep. And then that's when I realized, this is such a sad, lonely, pathetic man that he, the worst thing you could do to him is just erase his name from history.
Right.
Where it's not boil him alive or anything like that, or
because he'd still in some ways be happy
because he's being
talked
I
about.
had the best execution. I was, the most, everyone saw it. I was on.
I like that you're doing a little impression and your hands start going like Trump. you're doing the hand thing as you imitate him. That's fantastic.
I like to go, you do things properly. If you must do them properly.
Is there anyone in history that you can compare to him?
There are some. It's never.
Have there been? Let's start off like this. Are there any American presidents that you could compare to him?
The closest would be Andrew Jackson.
Okay.
The exception being that
fifth or no, he was.
I don't remember the exact number, but he
1800s?
One of the early ones. Yeah, okay. Early 1800s. So he made his name in the War of 1812. Is
he on the $10 bill?
20.
There we go.
He also did a lot of really harmful stuff. Like he was the person who first popularized the idea of campaigning.
Oh God.
Yeah.
I fucking hate campaigning.
Yep. Yeah. So that's where it's like, hey, how all these politicians need a lot of money to run these big campaigns. It's our boy Andy.
Isn't it weird? Not to make this go off too on a tangent, but isn't it weird that, yes, we should all have the right to vote, but it's kind of strange that we elect our president with a popularity contest.
If it makes you feel better, we don't.
Yeah, really, we don't, because we have the Electoral College, right?
And also a certain somebody lost the popular vote.
Right. But still, even though you would think there's a better way for... Wouldn't you want just a bunch of smart people to figure it out?
Well,
you'd have to trust these smart people, obviously.
Yeah. One thought exercise that I've put into it would be to do it like how most of the rest of the world elects their heads of government to, one degree or another, where that's called the Westminster system.
Okay.
Where they have like Parliament or the Dáil or whoever, they'll be like, okay, we won the elections. We have all the seats in government, or it's like us and our friends have all the seats in one way. So it's like, okay, so this guy is prime minister or Taoiseach or whoever.
So you elect all the members of the parliament, and then they decide amongst themselves
who would be the prime minister.
Got it.
So that's one idea.
Mm-hmm.
One problem is that the American president is the head of state and the head of government.
Mm-hmm.
So versus like in England, you have the head of state who's, the queen, and she does a lot of the ceremonial stuff, and, she embodies like the idea of the United Kingdom, and more like, hey, this is the face we want to project onto the world. Versus the United States, it's, the same guy who's also running everything.
Mm-hmm.
So then I'm not a political scientist, so I'm not 100% clear on all the advantages of doing it that way. But then you get a chance to break up some of that power and some of that prestige. And Ireland, I like their political system because in a lot of ways it combines the best of the American style and the best of the Westminster style, where was very deliberate on their part, where they're like, okay, we're doing things like the British now, but fuck the British. So their Eamon de Valera, who was the first big head honcho who ran an independent government, he was actually an American citizen. He was born in the United States to, I think, Spanish father of some kind. I think Dominican maybe, or I don't remember exactly, but Latin American father. And he, grew up a little bit in the States before coming back to Ireland. So he had a bunch of ideas of okay, we should have a president instead of, a king or whoever. And, I like the idea of a Senate, so maybe we should have that too. And it works pretty well.
It works well over there.
of late, there was a little bit where, you just had a new country, very messy divorce, and there's some fighting. And so it took a little while to get everything established. And De Valera, even himself, had a really stereotypical idea of the country as like, we'll have like the rural peasantry. For those of you who are at home.
How do you spell his name?
EAM. Or you can do, Amen, and then space DE. De Valera. Yep. Now, for those of you at home who can't see Anthony pulling up the pictures, basically, you're going to want to picture Alan Rickman.
Yeah.
He played him in the movie, did a fantastic job. Shockingly accurate.
Really?
Yeah.
Heman De Valera.
Yep. He was the first, I think he was the first Taoiseach, but he's very much was like a founding father of the modern Irish state.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. Second Taoiseach, according to the Wikipedia.
Oh, you trust Wikipedia?
For something like that, it's Wikipedia is good for like quick, like who was the 15th president,
right?
Stuff like that, where it's like there's not really too much controversy to it, but it's once you start getting into the particulars, then that's when you need to be more careful. One thing, though, that research tip for all you aspiring history majors out there.
Yeah.
They do list all their sources at the bottom. Yeah. So that can serve as a starting point.
To click on the citations?
Just to be like, this book.
Right.
Let me read this book. Got and it. Then, leads to one, leads to the other, leads to the next and next.
I'm on Wikipedia all the time. Just trying to learn.
Yeah, I know. Because it is a good idea. The problem is, when any old jackass can write anything, it's not, you're not going to have a perfect understanding.
Mm-hmm.
So, Andrew Jackson, like the guy we got in office now.
He was the original populist, and he was the first politician to really like rile up support at the lowest levels of society, which a lot of our founding fathers were against because, the classism runs deep.
Mm-hmm.
So they were like, you don't really want the mob running things because, they're the mob.
Right.
Which they kind of had a point.
Yeah.
But it is... Yeah, he had that idea of like, let's turn the campaign into a spectacle and let's, do all this, and come up with this fictional backstory of him as like, the log party kind of guy and, his rugged outdoorsman who was, he was part of the 1% too.
Mm-hmm.
He had a very privileged upbringing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the closest historical figure, which he, in my opinion, should not be on the $20 bill.
Why is he on there?
Because for a while, he was, he was like a great man in history. And, when people weren't thinking too hard about it, he was like, yeah. And he, got those damn natives off the land and, cleared it so we could civilize it. And Anthony does not have a 20 on him.
I do not have a 20. I was looking in my wallet as you spoke. See if I could pull out a 20. I don't.
Nope. Yeah. So, for a while, people were like, yeah, he was a great president and, he did all these great things. And then as it turns out, a lot of the things he did were kind of shitty.
Mm.
One especially was fucking with the National Bank. Or I don't remember what they used to call the Fed, but the central bank where, those exist for a reason. And like, it's not, no one likes the bank and no one likes, the bank is the man. No one likes the man.
Right.
Sometimes you need the man though.
Yeah.
Because somebody has to, regulate fiscal policy.
Yeah.
Or otherwise, you get hyperinflation or bad shit happens.
Bad shit happens.
Also not an economist, but can tell you from a historical perspective, bad shit happens.
So your boy, I'm going to refer to him as your boy in office gets elected because of the Electoral College.
Mm-hmm.
Are you a fan of the Electoral College?
Not the way it's done now. My thought would be, like, if I could make a suggestion, I don't know if like the Senate listens to
Yeah,
this.
I'm pretty sure they listen.
Okay. Yeah, so, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Senate Majority Leader, here's an idea where have the House of Representatives nominate a candidate for president and then have the Senate confirm them.
Mm-hmm.
Where I'm sure there's a lot of good reasons not to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just thinking like that sounds better than what we're doing now, where each state has its own dumbass individual popularity contest and then winner take all, and it's like
each state's weighted more than other states.
Like there's a reason not to do a direct popular vote.
Is the reason because then the big cities would always just declare the president?
Part of it, and then it's you can't. The idea isn't to have majority rule; it's to have consensus rule. So you don't want it to be like 51% said we're doing this, so that's what we're doing. You want like, okay, ideally everyone would just agree, but that's unrealistic. And hey, maybe you want some outside voices, so you want like 60, 70, 80% of people being like, okay, this is the right course of action.
Mm-hmm. But that's not what happened, right?
No, that's
not what happens with the Electoral College right now.
No, and it's not what really happens with American politics anymore.
Right.
Because, fun fact, the system wasn't designed to handle parties.
Mm.
So that's why you get like gridlock in the Senate, because instead of each person voting their conscience, you get, I have to vote with my party. And
if there's just always gridlock, and there's always just, whenever a party gets elected, they're basically undoing the shit the other party did.
Which, I mean, that's why political parties in general are a bad idea, and why our founding fathers initially restricted voting to, you want the best of the best voting. You can't let the mob vote, but my God, they could vote for anything. Which, again, also is not great. Mm-hmm. It's just one of, like Winston Churchill said, democracy is the worst form of government aside from all the other ones we've tried.
There's no perfect system.
No, and
especially at scale.
Yeah, and especially, 10% of everyone is an asshole. It's like 10% are great people, 10% are assholes, and then there's like the rest of us at the peak of the bell curve, just kind of, working our 9 to 5, trying to get to a closing time so we can go to our local, have a few pints.
Right.
Which that's, the rest of us. So in a perfect system, the 10% who were the best would just run everything and it would all work out. Question becomes, how do you decide who's, that 10%? And
how do you measure that?
Yep.
Well, you think your boy is going to be elected again?
I honestly have no idea at this point, because this is really, said, shit's bad right now.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going to happen. I can tell you that the Democrats are shooting themselves in the foot every step of the way.
Yeah.
So that's like, I don't know whatever like backroom nonsense needs to happen, but they need to like either get it narrowed down to 2 people, or they need to just like be like, okay, we won't say it yet because we still have the primaries, but this guy's our guy. Mm-hmm. That guy should not be Bernie Sanders. It should not be like Elizabeth Warren, I think, would be a good candidate, but that's yeah. That's
isn't it sad that that's how I know her?
Yeah,
because he's so pervasive with those nicknames, and it just becomes ingrained in your cult, in your
which
brain.
Is part of the
bullying tactics that he has.
It's just or, someone like that, where it's like, okay, just like a nice middle of the road, like I have, good resume, just kind of a very okay sort of like we don't, this isn't the time for a revolution. Mm-hmm. This is the time to like get back on track, take stock of where we are as a society. And then if we want to have the revolution after that, we can talk about it. But like not this week, guys. Like just everyone rally behind a strong candidate, start pushing out there like, hey, smart guy or Growl or whoever, just, very respectable, clean cut, et cetera.
Presidential.
Yep.
Someone presidential.
Yeah.
How does this happen that, how does it get to a point where Trump gets elected like this?
Yeah. Is that 2016 or 2020?
2016. So
2016.
How does he, I mean, other than the Democrats nominating probably one of the worst candidates ever to be nominated to compete against him.
Well, that's part of it, was that everyone knew in like 2008 election night, Barack Obama won. I think everyone was kind of like, okay, probably we're going to have 8 years of Barry. But everybody knew.
Barry?
Yeah, that's what my mom calls him.
Barry, okay.
Yeah, Barry and Shelley.
That's awesome. All right,
yeah.
Go ahead.
So everyone knew that Hillary Clinton was going to run. So they spent 8 years smearing her name and dragging her name through the mud and doing the best they could to, get their base riled up to crush her. Mm-hmm. So that's what the Benghazi hearings were about, where it's like, yeah, it's sad that things went down the way they did, but like the whole point of everything the Senate did was to smear her name. Mm-hmm. So it's not so much that she was a bad candidate. It's that they had, scorched the earth around her. And, she wanted to be president. I think she would have been fine as president, like as, I don't know if she would have been like great or even like not sucky, but very middle of the road. Mm-hmm. Very like, hey, let's all, it's like, all right, female president.
Right.
Got that off the to-do list.
Sure.
So that was part of it, where they, did everything they could to make sure that they would win in 2016. The other part of it was so how like Fox News will say something and the Republicans will say something and on and on and on. So yeah, got a bit of a cold. Sorry, internet.
You're good.
So they've been working that con for a little while now. Mm-hmm. So they've been, like trying to make sure a certain subset of the population identifies very strongly with their message, because they, their goal was like, okay, we have this idea of like, fuck poor people. Mm-hmm. So how do we keep doing that? Because most people are going to be like, hey, what do you mean? Like, I need, like unemployment. I just got laid off. What do you mean I'm lazy and should just get back to what? Like, fuck you. So their scheme was like, okay, how do we get, this big money, big time, pro-business agenda? How do we package that in such a way that, people will actually vote against their own best socioeconomic interest? So what they did was they tied it to the religious right, and they tied it to, I'll say to racism.
Sure.
So they tied all of that together into this package deal. And they but they were like, okay, we can't let the mob run everything. Like, I mean, by God, who knows what they vote for? They might reimpose tariffs.
Right.
Who would be dumb enough to do that? Oh, yeah. The United States bringing you the best fiscal policy 1700 has to offer. I don't remember when Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations, but everything we've done as a country in terms of, tariffs and trade wars and all that was shit that people figured out was bad like centuries ago. So, fun fact.
Nice.
So,
side note, you need to, if the guys from Voice from the Underground are listening to this, you guys should have Jimmy on sometime. It's a politics and pop culture podcast. I think you do great.
All right, maybe we'll see. I like giving people my opinion on things.
Yeah, you're good at that. You're a good historian, and you're good at giving your opinion. Continue.
Okay. But anyways, so the big money people, they kept the mob at bay because that's nobody wants mob rule. So. Like Reagan, for example, like evangelicals would get mad at him because he wasn't, he wasn't religiosity enough for them. And he was like, fuck them. What are they going to do? Vote for Barry Goldwater? Which, that's basically how, and again, this is a really broad strokes. And like I said, American history wasn't totally my thing. I did my coursework like everybody else, but never really captured my interest. So this is, again, broad strokes. So about 1980, you've got religious right, big money, all of them. They're on one side, and then you've got Democrats in the corner who were just kind of everyone else. And I'm going to be totally honest, they're like, just kind of there a lot of the time. So that exists until you get, one scared, lonely little boy who, even though he had a reality show and his name everywhere he could possibly put it, he never quite found daddy's love. So he had this idea of, I know, I'll run for president and then everyone will love me and, and then I'll maybe finally fill that empty place inside me. Right. So he basically said the quiet parts out loud. And he said what, the Republican Party had been like hinting at, like, hey, those people, and right. Where he said like, brown people bad,
right? They're not bringing their best over here.
The condensed version of Trumpism,
right? When he was running, I didn't actually think he wanted to be president.
No one did.
I thought he was just doing it just to fucking do it because it was the next thing he wanted to do.
Yep.
Did you actually think he wanted to win?
Nope. Didn't think he was either. Yeah, so fun, interesting sidebar that might make it into the histories one day. So the night of the election 2016, I, was drinking because everyone was. I don't know why you wouldn't be. And so then I was like, like the rest of the country, just kind of slowly, the horror started getting realer and realer. So I drank more and more. So needless to say, I was pretty... So I'm sure you've done this before where like the next day you're that weird mix of you wake up, you're sort of hungover, but you're still drunk.
Yeah.
So that was my next day. Yeah. And I had
that next day is like a Wednesday, I believe, right?
Yep.
The election was on a Tuesday night.
Yep. So it's Wednesday. I go into class and I had 3 classes that day. These were the topics. I am not making this up. The Black Death, the rise of fascism, venereal disease. Those were the 3 lectures I attended that day.
How appropriate, huh?
Yep.
So you think what Trump's doing is he's fascist?
I'm
jumping over here.
It's not a 1-to-1 comparison, but he's definitely, fascism curious at least. Mm-hmm. And he's very much, a lot of that same energy. Mm-hmm. It's like people compare him to Hitler, which is, it's not always helpful because it's, and the problem is people used to compare everyone to Hitler.
Yeah.
And it's like that, wasn't like swing and a miss there, buddy. Right. So it became hyperbole to be like, oh, he's just like the Nazis.
Right. That's not a very nuanced way to look at it.
No, but then it's like you do a side-by-side comparison. It's like there's a lot of the same talking points there. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of the same, like I said, a lot of that fascism energy is part of this thing that is happening.
Well, at least for us, he doesn't. I don't know how Hitler, like the nuance of how he got to where he was, but at least for us, we have a little bit of a check on him in terms of, or check on the president in general in terms of Senate and House,
which is how it's supposed to run.
Right.
However, that is very much dependent on the character and the honor of the people holding those offices. So, for instance, the Senate and the House of Representatives are supposed to they're supposed to legislate. And for a while now, and was a slow transition, but presidents would run on a platform. It would be like FDR is, again, like one of those big moments where he's like, hey, I have a plan to solve this, and that's what I'm going to run. And, he was elected 4 times. So so it's like, people are like, yeah, that's a good idea. And they come in. So it becomes a situation where the president is acting more as the head of the Democratic or Republican Party. And he's, rather than like the Congress making the laws and the president enforcing them, it becomes more, this party is in power, so that is what we are doing, which is an idea. It wasn't the idea that we went into this whole America thing with, because they were like, hey, that's, you go over to Britain, they've got party gridlock and people can't like cross party lines to, get shit done. And let's just all be individuals. And it's, we're the best of this society. Let's all get together. And, like the next day. So, they're like, how about maybe we don't do that and let's just have the Federalist and Anti-Federalist Party. And, to George Washington's credit, he stayed above it all, but, his predecessors didn't, or his successors did not.
Yeah, it seems like, we're definitely in a gridlock system now where anyone jumps party lines, they're basically done.
Pounced on, where you've got people who supposedly respect the military talking shit about John McCain for now, where it's like, honestly, fuck you. Yeah. Like, if you want to be like, I disagree with his decision to vote against repealing the Affordable Care Act,
fine. Yeah, I can.
But if you want to be like, oh, he's some stupid, rhino cuck, blah, 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 and he got captured, so that's not real heroism. It's like, you know what? You can go fuck yourself.
Yeah.
That's honestly you. And again, this is something where it's like, you are claiming to, like, you're shitting all over, like, Colin Kaepernick for kneeling during the anthem.
Yeah, respect the troops.
And you're saying, like, this is about respecting the troops, and you're actively disrespecting the troops, and you're actively disrespecting someone who gave up years of their life, their health, their...
He was savagely...
Yeah, he was literally fucking tortured. Yeah. And you're saying, like, oh, that, you know...
I like my heroes not captured or something.
And it's like, well, meanwhile, Cadet fucking Bone Spurs.
Right. How is that? Because you know, obviously you serve in the you serve the military, and he is like, the head of. He's the guy. He's
honestly nothing. It made me sick to think that you know, to go in every day and see his picture on the wall. Well, yeah, I was in the reserve, so it wasn't every day, but you know,
and he's the guy that can decide your.
Yeah, where it's like, hey, maybe we should go and, you know, station you at the border. And it's like, fuck you. You're going to take me away from, you know, my life. You're going to affect my unit's mission readiness so that you can scare up your base about brown people. Like, fuck you.
Right. That's rough. So. That's got to be a weird thing to live with.
Yep.
To disagree that strongly with the person that is your commander.
Mm-hmm.
Jeez.
But yeah, so
well, hopefully, for your sake, he doesn't get reelected, huh?
we'll
see,
your sake, but
right?
Yeah, we're like I said, I'm just trying to get to the end of the day so I can go to my local and have a few pints with my mate. That's where I'm at right now.
Yeah,
it's like, okay, there's. And I don't know where like anyone besides my wife is at with all this, but you know, it's something where try and get through this as best you can, but don't like just completely pretend like it's not happening. Like you don't have to like be out there like on the streets, you know, marching every day because, you know, we've got jobs and lives to live.
Yeah.
And
yeah, that's kind of my perspective on it is I'm not inundating myself in it, but I'm aware.
Right. Like check in every so often, you know, if something shitty is happening, call your congressman. Probably they won't listen because they've already decided what they're going to do because that's what their party's doing. But yeah,
this is kind of a rough time, huh?
Like I said, shit's pretty bad.
Yeah.
It's not time to panic yet.
Yeah. But
it is, like I said, this is a deciding moment for who we are as a society. This is going to be what America is to ourselves and to the rest of the world going forward. Where if you have, you know, a whole large chunk of time where this crypto-fascist shit show with, you know, politics that fell out of practice in the 17th century are running amok and people are actively preaching hate on the floor of the Senate, this won't be America anymore. That's like maybe it'll still call itself America, but that's because this country isn't like a people. Like, you know, France is France because that's where all the French people are.
Right.
You know, Spain is Spain because that's where all the Spaniards are.
Right. Chinese, so on and so forth. Yeah.
America is an idea. It's the idea that no one is above the rule of law, that, you know, everyone is endowed with inalienable rights to, you know, try and make the best life for themselves without having to worry about the status of their birth, the color of their skin, and obviously we've never gotten there, but at least we fucking tried.
Mm-hmm.
And if we reelect this monster into the White House, we've given up trying.
Is there anywhere else in history where they've tried an experiment like America? Are there any countries currently like this?
Not, most countries are kind of like this.
Light America?
But it's the same ideas where it's like, hey, maybe we should just kind of let people do their own thing.
Mm-hmm.
Is, the American idea is like, hey, let's just kind of all do our own thing. So people are like, hey, I kind of like just being left to do my own thing. So that's kind of what most of like Western Europe is doing.
A lot of Europe has a lot of different culture now.
It's what a lot of places are aspiring to. Places where, Europe ran roughshod over them are still trying to piece themselves together after that. But that's the idea. A lot of people are, because, it's a good idea.
Mm-hmm. I'd say so.
Yeah, I like it. So that's so there's a lot of places like that in terms of like systems of government and like the mechanics of like, hey, let's put a system of government in place where everyone can just kind of do their own thing with their lives. Then you have to look back to most recently would be, the United Kingdom and, England, then later the United Kingdom, because they were, that's where we came from. Mm-hmm. So that's where we got like the proto idea. So that's where, you had like the Magna Carta where, all the knights and barons got together and were like, okay, now this doesn't apply to the serfs, but what if just us got to like just do our own thing?
Let's just chill. We can do it.
Yeah, just us. And then like, the king's got to ask us for money. He can't just take it. And like, what if we could just do our own thing? And then, that evolves into parliament. And like there were other legislative bodies like that, but in like a lot of cases, they were just like, the king needs to walk in like, hey guys, where are we at as a country? Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm going to do this. Thanks.
Isn't it kind of flawed though? We started America with that idea.
Yep.
But then we also had slavery.
Yep.
So that already starts off on a shitty foot. It's a great idea, but you're not fully dipping your toe in the water.
Yeah, if the United States had abolished slavery upon its creation, and I'm taking this from the guy whose name I can't remember, who does the Revolutions podcast.
Google it. I got the fucking computer right here.
So
while you tell me.
Yeah, I'm jacking his words here, so props to that guy. But if we had abolished slavery right out of the gate, it would have been Mike Duncan.
Yep.
It would have been the greatest revolution in world history. But we didn't. And
were there people that wanted to do it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But because the problem that they ran into was the system of cash crops in the South worked on credit. So it was, they didn't have credit cards and shit, but just to give us a modern example, Thomas Jefferson would go, he'd, swipe his plastic really quick to buy his, like, not a farmer, so like whatever agricultural shit he needed for the coming year. And then he's like, okay, when I get my harvest in, then
I'll pay back.
So it's like, all right. So, they bring in their harvest, they pay their debts and, pocket a nice profit, mm-hmm. which all of that is, agriculture. Nothing wrong with that. Except a lot of that profit and a lot of that not having to, a lot of that, what made it work was I don't have to pay the labor. I just have to like pay for food and all that. And
I just got to keep them alive.
Yeah. and in chains.
Right.
Which is the part no one really wanted to talk about.
Right.
And even them, they recognize like this is kind of a shitty thing we're doing. But if we don't do it like this, our entire agricultural system and like our whole way of life is going to come to a grinding halt. And, that's going to upend the apple cart. And
there's not,
and then, obviously some racism where it's like, it's not like, they're Africans. Is it really that big a deal? And it was, but
there's not enough people probably that were willing to give up that life.
Yeah.
That money.
Because they didn't want to confront the fact that their prosperity was coming at the expense of other people.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why, like, in the Constitution, they say persons in bondage instead of slaves, because they were like, they didn't want to, like, it's like now how people are like, I don't want to think about how like my computer and iPhone and shit are all coming from a sweatshop in Taiwan or not Taiwan, China.
Mm-hmm.
Taiwan I hear is actually very nice, but
I've heard good things about Taiwan.
I've never been myself, but anyways, but I digress. So that's kind of like how it was now, where it's like most people aren't like, massively like, oh, this is a good thing for the Chinese because it will civilize them and it will, teach them how to be, not Chinese and et cetera. Where that's where they were at in a lot of ways, where they're like,
this kind of helps them.
Where that's where they were right. We're at where we are now in terms of like our phones and shit, where they're like, it's not great, but like, I also, what am I supposed to do? Not have an iPhone?
Yeah.
And then a little bit where it's like, and besides, they're other people. They're not my people. So who cares?
Right.
Which is racist.
Right.
That's
which,
yeah. So then as time went on, it started to get harder to be like, hey, you're enslaving people, maybe don't. And that's when they started to have to come up with all the other like, oh, it civilizes them and we're giving them, Western civilization and Christianity and et cetera, et cetera. And, that's where you start seeing more of like the long-term white supremacy type stuff really take hold, especially amongst the poor whites, because they were like, they were dirt poor and barely scratching out a living, but they could say, well, at least I'm not a slave. Like I'm still
feel better about themselves.
I'm still a free man. And
right.
So that's where you start getting, and, like even to give you an example, when the Irish came to America, they pounced on that a lot, where they're like, hey, I'm Catholic and I'm Irish, but at least I'm not black.
Yeah.
And that was part of their inroad. There was a lot of other things, but, the fact that the melatonin levels were compatible was a big part of it.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah.
If only we would have just abolished slavery.
It would have been great, but that's the one thing I hate about history is like, you want to do like the choose your own adventure thing where it's like, nope, this didn't work. Go back and, try it. This time I'll go left, but you can't do that.
What are your thoughts on, the argument, when we see this, a lot of controversy over this, where they take down the Confederate stuff. As someone that studies history, are you the type where we should have this stuff because it happened and you can't just erase history? So
that's not erasing history, because history is not in like statues. It's not in monuments that people put up during the civil rights movement because they wanted to, enforce their worldview, which, fun fact, that's when a lot of those went up.
Okay.
It's in like books and documents and primary sources and like letters and all that, where that's where you actually learn. And it says something about our society that future historians will look back on and be like, yeah, the racism ran pretty deep.
Mm-hmm.
And that will all be part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe like, put them up in like some kind of like Holocaust museum type thing.
Mm-hmm.
But honestly, you put up memorials to celebrate things. You put them up to, try and show off what's great about your, hometown, state, country, etc.
Mm-hmm.
You don't put them up so like, oh, everyone can, learn like the nuances of like how microeconomics played a role in the continuation of slavery into the early American Republic. You put them up because like you want to be like, yeah, it was right here where we kicked those goddamn Brits out of America once and for all.
Right.
That's where it's like, we got to celebrate. It's like a long form fireworks display where it's like, every day can't be the 4th of July, so you just got to like put a statue up.
Sure.
So that is all that is to say is that we should just take them down because, or well, I guess not we, it's the people of these communities should decide for themselves that they don't want to celebrate a legacy of racial injustice, of violence, of oppression, of all of the horrible shit that was done in the past, and you should just put it down and say, hey, let's be like, yeah, some things happened. Let's be better moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Where's the line? Where does that end in terms of taking things down and changing things? There's a lot of presidents that are acknowledged that
oh yeah,
racist as fuck and shitty people.
Yep. I mean, Thomas Jefferson, who's probably one of the best presidents we've ever had, also had the other side of the coin where he had a lot of children with his slaves and he didn't really acknowledge them and he was pretty shitty about it.
Mm-hmm.
It's where like you get people who they're celebrated.
More water, by the way.
Where they're in the history books for things like the Civil War, where it's and don't come at me with this states' rights bullshit. They fought for the continuation of their system and their society, an integral part of which was slavery. Mm-hmm. So they were fighting for this very narrow, very bigoted worldview. And that's not, maybe the only person I could conceivably be convinced could possibly be, like still have a statue of him would be Robert E. Lee. Mm-hmm. But that's a pretty big maybe, and that's because he straight up said, like, I can't invade Virginia. Like, that's my home. Mm-hmm. And that's so maybe just him, but probably not still. Because, he still did the whole...
He's still fighting for...
for slavery, right. For the idea of white racial supremacy.
And even if he's not necessarily, that's not his cause, the bigger picture is, it's still pervading if he wins.
Yeah, where it's like, okay, there's a lot of evidence that he was also pretty into the idea of slavery and of white supremacy. So he's probably still not your guy. Mm-hmm. It's probably just something like you need to be like, okay, this was a shitty thing that happened. We need to apologize and move forward. Mm-hmm. Where it's like, okay, we need to deal with this. We can't just be like, no, it was for states' rights and everything else is, it wasn't that was just kind of tangential, and it was about the sovereignty of Virginia, and it wasn't.
No.
And it wasn't, because they had all kinds of really shady laws that fucked with the sovereignty of like New York and Illinois, where they're like, hey, fuck whatever laws you made. If the fugitive slave law, if you get that, then you have to bring us back our slaves.
What I gotta ask, not to take this away from this serious matter, but I noticed you have the fucking book.
Oh yeah, I was working on some notes we've gone pretty far afield of.
Okay. Yep. I was like, what's in the book?
Yep. Tentative plan, but we're just kind of free-forming it.
Yeah, but we're just hanging out and free-form it. Okay. That's what history kind of, as you mentioned before we talked, history kind of lends itself to tangents. Because we have gotten on a tangent.
Oh yeah. Because history is context.
Yeah.
So the thing about context is there's always more context. Mm-hmm. And especially with history, where it's like, okay, you want to talk about like the, Romans. Okay, well then you need to talk about like the Mediterranean, and you need to talk about the Greeks. And if you're talking about the Greeks, you need to talk about the Persians. And if you're talking about the Persians, you need to talk about the Babylonians, and like on and on and on, all the way down to like, okay, what's the first thing some motherfucker scratched into a rock 10,000 years ago?
Right.
What? And then you do that, and then you're like, fuck, they did it all over the world.
So what is that first thing that fucking the Homo sapien did over the Neanderthal?
I don't remember like the first, like what the actual oldest known written record is. Mm-hmm. I do know the Epic of Gilgamesh is the oldest like poetry. Mm-hmm. I do believe we've got like all kinds of like record keeping and shit from before then. Mm-hmm. Because that's how writing got started, is people were like, okay, we've got like big societies, so we need to like kind of keep track of where everything is. So, okay, how are we going to do that? It's like, okay.
Our memory's not that great.
Yeah, it's like, okay, all right, we'll write it down. We can't do that yet. Fuck. Okay, we'll draw a picture of like the grain, and then we'll just do like tally marks, and that's how we know how much grain we have. They're like, okay, cool. All right. It's just crazy enough to work. So that, and then, over time, they're just like, okay, so they have the picture of the grain, and they're like, okay, that's also the word. They're like, wait, you can put that shit together. Mm-hmm. Then you've got like complex ideas. Then, from there, it gets kind of like weird and abstract. And then from there, you've just got, okay, this is a symbol. We agree means a sound.
Yeah, letters.
And then the Phoenicians were like, okay, let's have like, instead of like little pictures standing for whole words, let's have like little individual ones that are just like little sounds. Mm-hmm. And then, then you have an alphabet, and then on and on and on.
And on.
And then I think they still had to add like vowels and shit from there, but like, yeah, I mean, like you get the idea.
Yeah, it's just like I said, this all leads to tangents. We were just talking about. We started with my hangover, eating burritos. We go to. How did we even get to Ireland? I don't even remember.
I think you asked for an example of something.
Oh yeah, and then you went to Ireland, which is your focus of study, and then we got to America because I brought up how Catholics were oppressed,
and that's the current rabbit hole we're dealing with.
Right. Well, you did mention there was one thing I caught on that I wanted to bring up real quick. So you're an MMA fan. Mm-hmm. So what are your thoughts on Conor McGregor?
I'm so disappointed. Because he was something where it was like, like literally rags to riches, and he is, was at the top of his field, and he was like staying out of trouble, and he was, this really driven, dedicated person, and he was like, he seemed like such a cool guy.
Right.
And then
we don't know him.
Yeah.
But he definitely seems like, because I follow MMA pretty intensely, and I almost, not a historian, but I do have a good idea of what's going on. He definitely seems like the type of guy that money changed him.
Yeah,
really which is not, that's not uncommon. Everyone.
Oh my God. If I had $32 million right now, I would.
You would like to think you were you'd stay the same person, but you probably wouldn't.
I would not handle it well.
Right.
So much ridiculous stuff.
I remember just getting out of college and getting my first job and just having a paycheck and just spending it like an asshole.
Yep. No, that was me right when I finished when I was still in training. So it was like go out on the weekend, and then it's like, okay, I've got lots of disposable income relatively and no expenses.
Right.
So fuck it. Let's, go wild in fucking Oceanside.
Yeah, that's, I would even say that characterizes me even now. Yeah. I make more money and I'm still not saving as much as I think I should be. So going back to Connor, it definitely seems like, money has changed him. I quite enjoy Connor as well. I'm disappointed that he's not as into fighting as I wish he would be.
And it's like, I get it to an extent, because he's like, okay, at the top of my field, there's, I've reached the top of the mountain. What do I do now? But yeah, we're both athletes. We know it's like, that shit's hard.
It's very hard.
It's like, cutting weight fucking sucks.
Right. And getting to the top of your field, he's had to do years of sacrifice, and staying at the top isn't as fun.
No.
Getting there is fun, but then getting all the riches and having to stay there,
I know,
not
but
so
it's
cool.
Yeah.
But as someone that's a sports fan, and I like to see greatness.
And it's one thing where it's like, okay, it's one thing where it's like, okay, I've reached the peak. I'm going to bow out gracefully, and it's there. I've run the end of my road. Or even if someone who, like, they had a good, they went, they lost, and they never quite get that magic back, and they're like, okay, my time is done. I will bow out gracefully. But it's like, when he implodes like that, where he's like, just goes and makes such an ass of himself, and, really does all kinds of bad shit like that, it's like, oh, come on, man. Like, there's a certain level of class. Like,
yeah, he did a lot though in terms of bringing back, or not bringing back, but making Irish culture a hot thing again.
Which, that's good, but then that's when you start doing shit like, throwing barriers through a bus window and like causing all kinds of, problems, then it rubber bands back, and it's like, okay, now you're not representing your community very well.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. Like I said, the thing that I don't like about Connor, besides the fact that he doesn't fight anymore, is he's kind of made the UFC less of a sport. Now they reward the trash talk, and they want to see the spectacle. They want to see the super fights, and he started all that. What was cool about him was that I think he genuinely was just that guy, just on a grander stage. Where now you have other fighters copying that, and you can tell they're not that guy.
Where it's, you want to be like the purist, where it's like, I'm about the fight. Like, did you see? I I already forgot his name.
Which one?
The guy that Nagano knocked out.
Oh, Cain Velasquez?
Velasquez,
yeah.
That's it, yeah. Where because I was at that fight.
Oh, you were there?
Yeah.
No. Where was that at? In Anaheim?
No, that was in
Texas,
Phoenix.
Right?
No, Phoenix
yeah.
or Tempe or
Phoenix, yeah. Glendale.
That metropolitan area.
You were there?
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome.
Yeah, wife and I took a road trip.
To see the fight?
No, we have a friend out there, so he was like, we were like, hey, haven't seen you since the wedding. Let's hang out. And he was like, oh, well, the fights are coming up. And I'm like, sure, that'll work.
Ngannou is a scary motherfucker.
He was. It was a good fight, but I remember being there, and there were a bunch of people who showed up to see Cain Velasquez. Mm-hmm. They weren't really interested in the fighting. So you had, it was one of the female fights.
Okay.
Where they were, having like a pretty technical fight, as a lot of, fights tend to be. Mm-hmm. And the crowd was like booing them. Like not even
acknowledging.
Yeah, where it's like you're like, there's a good fight. I'm trying to watch. It's, a bit of a chess match, but that's all right. And they were just straight up booing. And I heard like some people were like basically sexually harassing these women from the stands.
Oh man.
And I'm like, it's shit like that where it's like you don't want to be like an elitist, or you want to be like you want to be like, yeah, everyone can come and watch this. But when like shit like that happens, and it's like you're just ruining it for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And then of course, Velasquez went down pretty quick.
Yeah, people were not happy.
No, and and believe you me, I was laughing my ass off.
Really?
Yeah, because it's like nothing against him personally. Like
it was just the crowd that he had attracted.
Yeah, where it's like, okay, this is, it's more like you people have reaped what you've sown.
Yeah, I think the fight you're referring to was probably Cynthia Calvillo and Courtney Casey.
That sounds about right.
Yeah.
It's kind of drunk.
Live fights are awesome. The only thing is, the crowd it attracts is not the most intelligent at all times.
No, and it's
worse now because of the Conor effect, where now you have a lot of bandwagon fans jumping on.
And, it's like, I want people to like things I like, but I don't really want you to be like an asshole. Like, because I'm not deep into it. Mm-hmm. I'm just like, kind of a casual fan.
Sure. But you wrestled, so you have a respect for what these athletes are doing.
Yeah.
Right.
I know how much work it goes into trying to compete at a high level in a combat sport. I know I know all that. And I also know okay, I don't know everything. So I've got my friend that I was visiting, he's training up to fight.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, he's 1-0 amateur right now. So shout out to Ian Miller.
Nice. Shout out to him.
Yep.
Hopefully he listens to the pod.
I'll let him know.
Good. I appreciate that.
Yep. And so it's like if I've got a question, I'm like, hey, why is, this doesn't make sense. Why are they doing it? And he's like, oh, well, it's like this, you idiot. I'm like, oh, cool.
Mm-hmm.
Or it's like I recognize if I don't get something, or if I'm a little bored by the experience, I'm not going to just be an asshole.
Right. I have a tough time conversing with people about MMA because I find the majority of people don't really know what they're talking about, mm-hmm. which is fine, but they don't know that they don't know what they're talking about. So I have a tough time. When someone, for instance, if at work someone will spout off, "Oh, Conor's going to knock out Khabib easily," and it's like he could, but that's probably not what's going to happen. And I don't have enough time to educate someone on the nuances of the sport and the fact that, hey, man, Conor hasn't fought in a couple of years now. Or he hasn't fought MMA in a couple of years, and your book fell. Yeah. And he's fighting a guy that's a really terrible style matchup for him. So this might not go the way you think. Just because you haven't heard this guy's name doesn't mean it's going to go the way you expect.
Yep. Go ahead. I do remember in the lead up to Maymac, where
they were the biggest con job ever.
I I had fun with it.
I did. I actually enjoyed it too, but
yeah, it's like I wasn't there for like,
I was there for spectacle for sure.
Yeah. And so, and also an excuse to drink.
Yes, which is great. We're just trying to work through our 9 to 5 to get to our local pub and have a few pints. Mm-hmm. This was a good reason to do so.
That was a good night. I had a lot of fun.
You knew though going in that?
Oh yeah, no. I basically knew it. Like, I figured it would end like basically how it did, or I thought they might like drag it out a little bit more. But I was like, no, Connor, no.
I'll give Connor credit, or I'll give the build up credit. Mm-hmm. I mean, I watch MMA and I've watched boxing for a good amount of years. I know that it's highly unlikely that a top level MMA guy can cross over to boxing in his first fight and beat one of the all time greats. Even at a diminished state that Floyd Mayweather was in, he's still a high level boxer.
Yeah.
So, but I'll give him credit. In the build up towards the end, I was going, well, what if he did knock him out?
Yeah, where it's like that.
What if he landed that magic punch right
on the internet where like the wife's like looking at her husband and he's looking away and she's like, I bet he's thinking about other girls right now. And then he's there like, what if Connor lands that left?
that would have been something, but
I know
it was so unlikely.
No. But it was fun, and it was
fun.
It was some harmless, good, clean fun.
The thing that sucks about that fun is now you have other fighters that want to do that thing,
but they're not.
But they're not. You're not that fun.
No.
There's nothing right now that'll be as fun as that was.
Because that was what I really liked was in the lead up to that. They were basically doing the trash talking equivalent of just trading yo mama jokes back and forth. Where it's like, I knew it wasn't like it wasn't like Jones versus Cormier where it's like where they legitimately don't like each other and you can see it. was they're just kind of like, yo mama's so fat.
Well, the funny part about that was they put them on this tour. Mm-hmm. I think it was 4 or 5 cities: New York, Los Angeles, Toronto, and London. Was the 4 stops, and they put them out there and to promote this fight. But they basically, the way they set it up was they both had as much time as they wanted to do a stand-up routine. And you could tell after the first or second leg that they didn't have any more material, really. They were trying to come up with stuff, but they're not stand-up artists. They're not comedians.
I could picture Floyd Mayweather though hiring Kevin Hart to come back him up. Like, all right, write me some jokes.
You could tell that Floyd was really running out of stuff because he started dropping the F slur in I think the 3rd stop.
Yeah,
he calls him a egg.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh man, but you could tell he was you could just tell he didn't know what else to do anymore.
Yeah.
So you could only cuss this guy so much and say you're a bitch, you suck, you're a bitch, you're a hoe. So then okay, what else can I say to this guy?
It's honest. He's got so much money. He should have been like, hey, Kevin Hart, come to my house this weekend. We'll write some jokes.
The problem is Floyd can't read.
Yeah.
Have you seen that? Look that up on YouTube.
I have not. I don't have a problem believing it though.
Yeah. There's one where he has to read a radio spot and you can just tell. I mean, he can read, but he's having difficulty reading this radio spot. And that's
he was
jumped on.
Basically raised to be a boxer, so I'm not surprised he's not as good at other things.
He's amazing at what he
was raised his entire life to do.
I really dislike Floyd Mayweather though.
I
intensely dislike him because now Connor's actually in the news for this too. But anytime you're convicted of hitting a woman, or hitting kids, that's rough.
Yep, and that's the cycle of violence and poverty, and it's like, oh, guys,
that sucks.
You've got to rise above that.
But then again, we do have a president in power that says you can grab him by the P word, and basically admit on the radio that he's at least sexually harassed women.
Yep.
Was it what he said? You kiss them, and I don't know.
Yeah, that's just
not to tie this back to your boy, but.
Yep,
it all comes back when you have a guy in power that pervaded that.
Actively wants to be the center of the universe.
How are you on time? We've gone for a pretty long time.
I have literally nothing else to do tonight.
Nothing to do today. No. Well, we'll go for a little longer.
Okay.
Let's get back into... Actually, you served in the Marines.
Mm-hmm.
How difficult was that?
In
terms of... I'm talking about the training and the life.
The physical stuff wasn't really a problem for me because where they're like, all right, you've got to run 1.5 miles. And I'm like...
I did that every day in wrestling.
I was on the track team in high school.
Yeah.
Okay.
Aye,
sir. But then the problem... so people either struggle physically, they struggle...
mentally?
Yeah, I get more like discipline-wise and like that, or they struggle with the hierarchy. And it's like everyone, depending on the day, everyone's going to have a different version of that issue. But very few people like really thrive in that environment. I mean, like I didn't. That's why I got out. But the problem I had wasn't so much like the being like yelled at or like the exercise or all of that. It was the...
Are you yelled at a lot?
Yeah.
Is it literally like how it's portrayed on television?
I mean, in boot camp, yeah. It's like they're basically always screaming at you, which like at first is kind of an adjustment, but then after a little while, you're just like, I don't give a fuck any. Like I ran out of fucks to give 6 months ago, whatever. But once you get done with that and then you're like actually in your unit, you get treated slightly better. But I mean, there's like a
hierarchy.
Yeah. And not even like, NCO to junior enlisted. There's like, junior enlisted, like the senior lance corporals are going to, make you do all the bitch work. And then, no, I don't know, but.
Is this the way that the military is set up? Is that a good way to do things, you think?
It's a good way to do things in a war zone. And when you're preparing to go to a war zone, it's not necessarily always the best approach for like teaching things or for like training or one of the problems I had was I'm smarter than most people. And that's...
I would agree. You're smart.
Yeah. I'm gifted in that area. Other people are gifted in other areas. Like we're all just people. Who gives a fuck?
Right.
But it was when you've got these petty tyrants who they just don't, who this is the only thing that gives their life meaning is they can be like, well, I'm a corporal in the Marine Corps. And like, that's great, but it's not everything. And it doesn't like make you a better person. So for instance, I had my last stretch in the Marine Corps where this guy was, he had been in my same unit, but then his contract was up, he left, but then he came back. Didn't really know him before then. And I was just there and like everyone was really like pretty tight in our platoon. It was, we had a way of doing things and it was fine. Like it wasn't, we worked together as well as can be expected. And he comes in and he just wants to like, be the big man. So he confuses leadership with what drill instructors do, which is not at all the same thing. And that's another huge problem in the Marine Corps, but that's we don't have time for my anthropological dissection of the culture of the United States Marine Infantry. We don't. So that's anyway, what was I saying? So he was out of shape which was one problem. And he just wasn't he wasn't intelligent. He wasn't good at anything. He just kind of, rode that seniority into a promotion, which, literally anyone. Yeah. I mean, it's
literally, you could find that person in every office and in society.
Yeah. We're just a very bottom 10% of humanity kind of person. So
stuck around long enough to rise to a power position of power.
Yep.
Okay.
And so he just made everyone miserable. And he tried to compensate for his shortcomings by acting big and putting everyone else around him down. So we had this one guy, name was Dean. He was a fucking character. So he was always doing weird, crazy shit, which there's someone like that in every platoon. And he was like, that's our Dean. He forgot all his warming layers when we went to rural Wisconsin in the winter. Oh, Dean. It's like, everyone give him your extra t-shirts. So that's, so he'd forget stuff and we're like, all right, okay, so you forgot your stuff. We just dummy cord everything to you. Problem solved. But this guy, he actively put him down every day, where the point where this really bright, cheery guy who he fucked up and he but he took it like a man. He took his lumps. But this guy just rode him for no good reason for just day after day after day until after about a week, this bright, cheery kid was like, man, fuck this. I don't want to be here. I don't want to fucking deal with this. And so that was...
You're just seeing bullying at this point.
Yeah, where he's just a bully and he's just a petty piece of shit. But you have to, it's literally the law that you have to show this person certain levels of respect. And that was the part... Rough. Yeah, that was the part I didn't handle very well.
That was your disenfranchised moment right there?
Yeah, where it's, I had bad NCOs before that, but it was that where I'm like, this is a human being who has no redeeming qualities. And this is a person who just who's just making everything around him worse. And he's in a position of power. And that was something where I just couldn't wrap my head around it. But, that was just me. There were other people who like short guys, especially when on marches, they just couldn't handle it because, they've got little legs and, they small people. They can't carry it.
Yeah.
Nobody's fault. It happens. Some guys struggled with that. Other guys, we had a few who they just couldn't handle getting yelled at and getting in your face where it's, okay, you want to say okay, you have to know your Marines and know how to, deal with that. But it's dude, you knew what this is going to be right. Come on.
You signed up. You should have an idea of what
the Marine Corps does not bullshit about the yelling.
No, they tell you right up front.
It's in their recruiting commercials where they're dude in dressed like a drill instructor screaming at you. Right. That's part of the advertising. Right. You can't claim you didn't know that was going to be happening.
Yeah, and at that point, you're just being ignorant to what you signed up for.
But yeah, so that's, maybe they thought I'm not really sitting in judgment of him, but it's because, I got burned out and disillusioned too. It's not for everyone.
Well, I'm glad you got out and you might
didn't get shot.
Yeah, didn't get shot. Can still speak intelligently about things and pursue things that you actually want to pursue rather than defending this country for someone you don't like.
Well, it's not like I if there was like some like, you know, if like there was like the Nazis like invaded from the moon or whatever, and they're like, we need every able-bodied man to, you know, repel these, you know, shitheads. I would be like, all right, I'll be the first man there, but we're not really doing that right now.
There's nothing to rally against, right?
It's not even that. It's like, you know, we've got a military geared towards a certain mission. I, you know, thought I'd take a look, see if it was for me. It wasn't for me. Did my time.
How long was that time?
6 years.
Oh, wow.
But I mean, it was like weekends and 2 weeks in the summer. So it's like, it honestly wasn't like that bad, but you know, it's, I did my time, which was, you know, weekends for 6 years. And
is that the minimum amount of time you can do?
For a reserve contract, I thought it was, but I thought I saw someone who had like a 4-year contract, and we were like, what the fuck? How did you?
Damn it.
Whose dick did you suck to get that? Which dick sucking is a big thing in the Marine Corps.
Is it really?
Or you like implying like, or saying like, because everyone's very secure in their masculinity.
Sure.
Because they're like, we're Marine infantry, like, what do we have to so they're a lot more comfortable being like, you know, you suck dick, and
right.
We all suck dick.
There's not the purveyance of masculinity because everyone's
there's no need to like puff up your chest and act like you're hot shit because you are.
Right.
So
you're in the Marines.
Yeah, you're Marine infantry. Like, you got nothing to prove.
You say that, and you are automatically command respect from most people that can think intelligently. Yeah.
Or even like a lot that don't, and it's just
even then. Yeah. Well, this was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I think we should definitely do this again.
I'm around.
You're not too far away.
Nope.
And we barely even touched in your notes. We didn't touch your notes at all.
Not really, but I was mostly working from memory anyways. So
nice.
It's all good.
Is there anything you want to plug before we get out here?
In theory, I'll have a book coming out whenever I finish up and people are. So that's, you know.
Will it be under Jimmy McPike or Bard Brehon?
Probably under Bard Brehon.
Bard Brehon, okay. And
we'll see.
What is the book about?
So that is. So this is going to be like. This isn't like the next great American novel. This is some shit that's going to be fun and, you know, not really like trying to change the world with it. So it's about a detective in Chicago, and he sold his soul to the devil back in the day. And so the deal was like, okay, you can like just kind of hang out upstairs and you'll be eternally young and et cetera, et cetera. But then like when when someone escapes from hell, you gotta fetch him back. And oh, by the way, if you fail, well, it is hell. So it'll be episode 1 of his adventures with that, or not. It'll be, the first in the series, and
it'll be a book.
It'll be a book. Yep.
Oh, cool.
And what happens is there is a cult on the loose in Chicago, and they are kidnapping and killing people for nefarious purposes. And he gets shanghaied by the FBI to help out with that. And so he's got to run down the bad guys, save the day, et cetera, et cetera.
Looking forward to seeing whenever that does come out. Looking forward to reading that.
No, I just got to actually, because I finished up the draft for it, but now I need to do a whole typed out formal spell check draft where it's, fix all the sand it down a little bit before I can start showing it to publishers.
Well, best of luck with that.
Yep.
We'll definitely have you back on if you liked Jimmy. He was on the Jock and Nerd podcast. It says here 171 you were on. I think you were on one prior to that too.
Yep. I think it might have been like 52, but...
Yeah, it was right after Andrew Gildy came on.
Shout out to the Guildmaster. He was my wrestling coach the last 2 years of high school.
Yeah, that's how we got connected. He was on our show first, and then you started listening because of him, right?
Yep. Things to plug. Man of Sin by Andrew Gildy.
Yeah, I have that.
Oh, yeah. It's good.
That's good. It's good stuff. Also, it's funny we started off the show this way, but if you want to read some old articles on the place to hang your cape, Bard Brehon, they're still up there.
Yep.
So you can check those out too.
And once again, sorry, David and everybody.
Maybe one day again.
Maybe.
All right. I'm going to turn this off.
All right.